here on my bench we have 1 kilo of ox cheeks. Now I'm going to make today braised ox cheek casserole. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to look for any nasty tendons on the ox cheek itself, any fat that I want to take off, because these can be quite tough. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to cut them into quarters. So I'm just going to go straight down the middle with a very sharp knife, and you can see that's fairly tough to cut. Now basically cows eat all day, so there's quite a bit of muscle here that you need to break down, which is why you always slow cook these things. So I'm just going to chop these up into nice little chunks. There's a bit of gristle in it, take that out. Don't want that bit. By slow cooking these will actually break down any of the nasty bits inside, any of the tendons, which are keeping it tough to cut at the moment. So what we're going to do, you can either put this in a slow cooker and cook it for 8 to 10 hours. I don't have the time today to do that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put it in the oven for at least 3 hours and see what it turns out like. Now we're cutting fairly big chunks here, and 1 kilo of ox cheek is about £7 a kilo. And we can feed at least 4 or 5 people with these. And obviously, if you bulk up on the vegetables, you can probably get another one out of that too. Now what we're going to do in batches, I've got a couple of tablespoons of flour here, plain flour. I've put in some herbs, some thyme in this case, dried thyme, sprinkle of salt, sprinkle of pepper. And all we do is take our meat, put them in the flour, get a nice little dusting of flour on the meat, and this will actually allow you to fry off the meat, sealing any juices inside the meat. But the flour will also go golden when you cook it, and it will actually also thicken any sauce that you put these chunks of meat into. Any seasoned flour you have left over, we aren't going to throw away. We're going to keep this, and we're going to use this to also thicken our sauce up when we start frying the meat off. So now we're going to actually splash some oil into our pan, which I've left to heat up, and then we are going to fry off in batches our seasoned meat. A few glugs of olive oil. Don't use virgin olive oil, it's a waste. Use the second press stuff or the third press stuff. It's got a bit of flavour to it, and you're not using all your money on expensive olive oil just to fry it. I've just seared off one batch, the nice crusty brown bits on the outside. That's ready to go into our stock pot. We didn't want to overfill the pan because that reduces the heat in the pan and stops the searing process. That actually starts to boil the meat as well, which is not what we want. So we position our meat in a clockwork pattern. And that way we know what meat we put in first. That'll be the one we want to turn first. Our meat is browning lovely now. The flour on the top has gone all crisp. The meat is brown. It's nicely seared. All we need to do now is transfer this over into our stock pot. And what we'll do, we'll use the same frying pan with the same juices to cook our vegetables. And once our vegetables are cooked, we'll deglaze the pan with a little splash of wine, add that all into the stock pot, and then we can put this in the oven for at least 2.5 hours. The meat will actually tenderise and it should be fantastic. And what we'll do is serve that up with probably some kale maybe, and some mashed potato, or if you want to, some polenta. Polenta is quite nice with this. Okay, for our vegetables, I've got one leek which I've quartered, washed, and then diced into thumb-sized chunks. I've got 2 medium-sized carrots which I've halved, and again cut into thumb-sized chunks. I've got 1 onion which I've halved and just sliced, and then I've got 2 sticks of celery which I've diced. And what we're going to do now, we're going to add this to our frying pan and fry these off. While our vegetables are cooking, I've chopped up 3 large cloves of garlic, and I'm going to add that to the frying pan now. We'll let that soften up. The onions are wilting down nicely, so is the leek. I can see the carrots are starting to soften. And what we'll do, we'll just layer this on top of our stock pot and put the oven on, and we'll cook this for 2.5 hours in the oven. And then we'll have a look at it, see what the meat's like, and we might want to just continue cooking it for another half an hour or so, just so that the meat is actually broken down, all those tendons that are in it. And we want to be sort of able to pull the beef apart with a spoon and eat it with a spoon. That's the sort of texture we're after. Right, so I'm going to transfer this to my stock pot. Now in our stock pot we had a litre of chicken stock, and what I did, I opened a bottle of red wine and I reduced half a bottle of red wine by about a half, and then I added that to the top of the chicken stock that we had in here, which was lightly simmering. We fried our beef off to get a colour on it, seal the meat in, and then we fried our vegetables off to make a nice stock to boil alongside the meat. Now what we haven't done is we haven't seasoned the stock in any way. So let me get a spoon. We need to taste this, and we need to add salt and pepper to taste. Now our pepper is our spice, and our salt enhances the flavour of everything else. Which I know is quite tasty now because the beef is actually coming through the wine and the stock. So what I'm going to do is add some pepper. I'm only going to add a little bit of salt. That's ready to go in the oven, bar one last exercise. With our frying pan, we've been frying away and the meat's getting quite crispy. So what we're going to do, we're just going to chuck a little glug of wine on top of that. Deglaze our pan, get all the crispy bits off. Give that a bit of a stir down. Anything in there can come off. Get added to our stock pot because that's going to be flavour. Now all we need to do now is put a lid on this and put this into a preheated oven at 200 degrees. And what we'll do, we'll turn it down once it comes to heat, comes to a boil in the oven, and then we'll cook that for another 2.5 hours. And then we'll be ready to serve up with some mashed potatoes and some greens, winter greens. This is our stew that we've just taken out of the oven. It's been cooking for 2.5 hours now. I added in the mushrooms a little while ago. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to try and cut into one, see how tender they are. Now after 2.5 hours, I did say that when we came to check these, the meat should be very tender. And I did say that we should be able to pull the meat apart with a spoon. So here goes. There we go. That's butter soft. The sinews in the meat, because this is quite a muscular piece of meat, need long cooking. 2.5 hours is sufficient for the marbling and the various bits and pieces in the meat to actually break down into our stew. Now I'm just going to give this a taste. Very, very tender.